Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, On the Grid, curated by Kelly Dietrich. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist Robert C. Banks, Jr. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth, so if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thank you everyone, and welcome, Robert.
Hey, hello, good morning. Happy Autumn Tuesday, wet Autumn Tuesday up here in Cleveland. Big shout out from up here, you guys in Columbus. And thanks for having me. So, ready to rock and roll here. And everybody that's tuning in, welcome aboard. Okay. I'm used to this. I'm new to this. I'm not used to this, so I'm a little nervous, but we're gonna make this very entertaining as well as enlightening. So yeah. Any questions or should we just start?
You can go ahead and get started, Robert.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's do it. It's 11 o'clock here, and you're going to hear a little bit about Robert Banks and what he does. Okay. Good morning. My name is Robert Banks. I'm a photographer, filmmaker, or pretty much a guy that likes playing with light and cameras and film and whatnot. And I work primarily in the medium of analog photography. However, the photography is an offshoot of what I do as a filmmaker and somewhat of a narrative, pseudo thematic, conceptual type storyteller. So that being said, let's do a little bit of seeing who Robert Banks is from day one to see how this whole thing got started, because you're going to get a condensed version of what I do and how I do it and why I do it, even though it may not make sense to most of you, but I had a very unusual childhood. Um, I was born in 1966, September 7th, the night before Star Trek premiered. I was born in the Huff area, downtown Cleveland, Ohio. Both my parents were much older, Robert Banks Sr. and my mother, Nellie Banks. There they are right there. Because my parents were older, a lot of people, for some reason, had this theory that they were my grandparents because I was too young to have parents that old. But that's just one of those things. It was kind of odd because my mom had several other kids from her first marriage. So I have several half siblings that are much older than I am. And my dad, I'm my father's only child. So, and he was the one that pretty much got me into all this crazy stuff because he had a thing for media. And even back in the day, when people had black and white TVs or whatnot, he was all about, the whole magic of entertainment and everything. But he really loved cameras and he loved photography and he loved home movies and all that stuff. So I was pretty much raised with all that. This is me with my siblings. My mom right here. She's in the bottom left. And my two sisters and my two older brothers. My sister Emily passed away sadly a few years ago. But my older brothers are both kicking along with my sister, but that's me, the goofy kid in the bottom. So you see the age gap. Yeah. That was like 1980 right there. My oldest brother, he's 16 years older than I am. So, but we were all trained in the arts, mainly with music. So we were all given music, I guess you could say, as a way of being kept off the streets. But I was even more so interested in sound as well as visuals, and particularly light and color and all that stuff. So I went to the Cleveland School of the Arts, where I was one of the first to enroll and first to graduate. And my parents, of course, were proud of me for that. Graduated in class in 1984. My interest in photography, like I mentioned before, evolved out of my passion for cinema, which in many ways evolved out of just this obsession of capturing things through light and color and the whole intrigue of shadows and all that stuff. But it had nothing to do with the whole artistic science. It was just, I just loved that stuff as a kid. My mom here, she saw this as nothing more than a big hobby, and I was going to grow out of it because to her, this was not a career field to have. It was no reason to try and make a living being an artist, especially if you're going to do work with cameras and whatnot, which is what she saw it as, or pretty much a lot of my family and friends saw it as. So, but there was something more there. That there is a portrait I shot of her at Thanksgiving back in 2005. One of the few times she visited my studio because she pretty much didn't really get around much once she hit 80. She passed away sadly this past April. She was 98. She just would have had her 99th birthday this past Wednesday. And, she's a key part of my legacy along with my dad. And I miss her so much. But at the same time, there was a little bit of rebellion because she just felt that, you need to get a real job. That's not a job for a Black man. Had to hear that a lot. Now, my dad used to buy us a lot of films to run. And this is what it got me into the whole film bug thing, because the magic of having these little 8mm reels and running these little digest versions of these films, these were something that you could buy at the actual department stores back in the day. And some of you people remember these, I'm sure, because this was a key element. But the whole idea of running films on a projector in your living room had a certain magic to it. So that was in many ways the planting of the seed of me wanting to get into making films, so to speak. But even more so, the idea of a projected light from a little box on a wall, and this whole concept of image projection from celluloid. So while most people got into the stuff years later because of Star Wars, it was running 8mm films and also comic books. Comic books played a tremendous part of my getting into the whole element of visual storytelling, as well as just abstract colors, abstract lines, abstract shapes, designs, reactions, just really over the top. So comic books, graphic novels, once again, at an early age. And luckily, because I had older brothers, I inherited a lot of their comic books. So I had some actual books from the 60s that pretty much would be collector's items now. But sadly, my mom got rid of a lot of those, along with some other contingencies, because a lot of kids, I guess, back then had parents that didn't take this stuff seriously. Sadly, I was one of them. I do have a few of those books left over, but a good chunk of my awareness of composition, storytelling through shapes and emotions and these lines and all this stuff, that was a key component there as well, too. So along with comics, going to the movies, going to the theaters. We had several what they would call grindhouse theaters in our neighborhood. After church, we would go to the movies every so often. This is just a representation of that. I couldn't find any vintage photos of the Hippodrome or the Scrumpy Dump or the Embassy, but there were a lot of theaters that we would go to see double features, and a lot of them would be ironically horror films or B movies or whatnot. Once again, key impact, because anything involving projection, film, images, sounds, I love that stuff. And I knew as a kid I wanted to do this. But at the same time, nobody was teaching filmmaking here in Cleveland, with the exception of my teacher, Keith A. Richards, who was my professor at Cleveland School of the Arts, along with Dorothy Lee. They had a college level high school photo film curriculum. And so to do filmmaking, you had to learn photography first. And so hence, and I learned with his Nikon. He had a Nikon F just like this, and I have two of these. Old cameras, but they're workhorses and they still deliver great goods. So my theory was, well, I want to do films, and we did. I shot a lot of 8mm, stuff like that. But I really wanted to get into the creative aspect of cinema, almost as a visual art medium, so to speak, because I love what I saw in comic books and I love what I saw in certain other films that were kind of out there, but I didn't want myself to look generic, pedestrian, amateurish. I really wanted to go the extra mile with composition, because I didn't mention it hardly too much, but I did draw a little bit. I didn't draw too well, but I was into drawing. I sketched out a lot of my ideas and whatnot. I did a little bit of painting as well. But the idea of trying to sort of strategically construct an idea and design a concept, not so much by taking a picture or filming it, but putting things in the frame and thinking about the space and the nature of the space and the nature of the frame and all these other things that were very fundamental with expression through visuals, but still go a little bit out of the box. Because I saw a lot of crazy stuff coming up as a kid involving other forms of visual art and visual entertainment, dance, performance, stuff like that. Once again, we did stage plays at our local community center, Rainey Institute, a lot of that stuff, but there were also visual art components too. And so the whole idea of combining all that, what I didn't know though, was that all of these things were typical in film production. But once again, you couldn't always get a crew together to do these things because I knew nothing about that. So the easiest thing would be to do is just draw the images and then take a camera and photograph it. And this would lend itself to almost doing basically what you would call a storyboard narrative. Storyboards, we all know about those. But regardless of that, any chance I had to play with actual film celluloid, just to look at the frames, even if it was a negative, that was a key bonus right there, because you can be as analytical as you want it to be in terms of checking how the frames relate, the space relates, how going from point A to point B to point C, or top third, middle third, right third, the rule of thirds, all these things. All this stuff was marinating in my brain when I was a kid, and this translated into high school and later translated to me post-college, post-military, and these things are still in the back of my head. So it's almost like a borderline fetish with celluloid and photography. And when I was at the Cleveland Institute of Art, one of my best friends and big inspiration and collaborator, Dexter Davis, this was from spring of '85. Dexter 100% knew I was passionate about the visual arts and how I could take a camera or a lens or a light and I could do cool, crazy things. And where he saw I had a weakness in doing traditional painting or whatnot, which I was catching hell then, because I had no fundamental, what do you call it? I had very little college prep for art, in particularly understandings of painting and fundamental draftsmanship. I could do it, but I wasn't. It was a weakness for me. It wasn't a strong point. And a lot of the professors, they accepted that, but they knew I had an eye for something, and they were saying, you know what, keep doing what you're doing because you see things. You're exploring all these nuances. Do it the way you see fit. You may not have it in your wrist or your way of observation, how you translate it, but you have the fundamentals and the foundations for that. And they really encouraged that. One of those professors, Gary Schumer, he wound up working at Disney. He was one of their main guys there. At the same time, because I was living with my parents still, believe it or not, I was getting kind of frustrated and fed up being in Cleveland, and I needed to get out of here to sort of get a feel for what it was, just to be on my own. So I joined the military. I was in the Air Force for a little while. That opened up many possibilities, and that sort of was the beginning of the real angst that I started to understand in terms of what was like being out here on your own, but still knowing what the world really is. Because being in Cleveland, being in a little box bubble within, family and friends, it just wasn't enough. So I needed to go out there and really get a sense of what was out here. And things really started to click at that point. So here we go with our new beginning. And this is a photo that I shot. This is one of the few digital photos you're going to see in this whole presentation. I work mainly in analog. My personal medium of choice is analog medium. That's filmmaking, photography, or whatnot. But I shoot a lot of digital, mainly for commercial work. But every so often, I just want to exercise my senses of every aspect of light, color, composition. You're going to hear me say this a lot because it's all about the photons, right? All about those little energy neurons, photons that, make things. And that's what photography is. And so we have that in our brain. There's a camera in here. These are our lenses, and basically our aperture and our shutter speed and all that is down here. So every true photographer, any visual artist would know this. It's all about what's up here. So letting go for me was taking the bare essentials and just getting in deep and dirty. And with using the 16mm Bolex camera, that was my first attempt in sort of exploring that with traditional filmmaking. And when that didn't work, I hopped back into doing stuff with my 35mm SLR. I had a Ricoh 35mm KR10, and I had that throughout high school, throughout college, while I was in the military, and I used that camera until the springs died. These are actual negatives from like 1990. And some of them I scanned, but I couldn't find the files. But I figured, let me just show you some actual real negatives. I did hand process film back in the day. I learned how to process film in high school. I had an understanding of the process of working with chemistry, mixing chemicals. So I processed my own black and white, my own color negative. I did E6 process for color slide film. I did all that stuff. And I actually printed in the darkroom. So everything I did was 100% hands-on. The problem was I was not aware of these allergies that I had. I had very sensitive skin. I still have it. And this is something as a child I couldn't really figure out. And my parents sort of blew it off. My mom always said, that's your imagination. But I wouldn't. This time of the year, like autumn all the way to early winter, I had bad allergic reactions to anything, certain medications and whatnot. And with darkroom chemicals, because I would go into the darkroom without any mask or gloves, and I would get, after 8 years or so of doing that, I would get dizzy spells or nauseous, and I would break out in rashes. So by the time the 90s rolled around, I had to stop processing, and I had to have the labs do it. But these are all examples of stuff I've done in the last 25 years. Some of these are actual slides. That's a 120 slide right there. And these are 120 slides. But this one right here was actual long roll slide when I ran through my movie camera. And a lot of this was just, once again, jumping in head first and just exploring, experimenting, getting in down and dirty and just indulging in the process and everything. When you read about all these people that are famous that do all these innovative things and all that, the majority of them did the same thing. They just went in head first and just got down and dirty with their craft, and they had no shame about it whatsoever. So you're going to see a lot of maybe pseudo repetitiveness and things that I photograph, but a lot of this is just therapeutic for me, for lack of a better word. This is from 1980. This is one of the pictures I shot. Her name is Simona Dozier. She was one of my classmates at School of the Arts, and this was in our school yearbook. Um, and I shot that picture and I processed the film and I actually printed it in a darkroom. That was one of my little weird shadow explorations because I have this obsession with light and shadow. This is something I've had since I was a child in terms of being fascinated by any aspect of light, mainly and particularly from natural daylight, different times of the year and all that. All these things were like processing in my head. So any chance I could play with any type of shadow, but once every so often I would photograph something. So this is one of those examples. Same thing. I shot this with my Ricoh AR10 and hand processed it and printed it myself. This was from an 8x10 print. These are from my old portfolio I actually dug up, believe it or not. This was from 1988. This is my friend, Alex Michaels. He's a screenwriter and an actor, and he wanted to do a short film, and he wanted to incorporate still photo montage with the film. And so I said, yeah, that's right up my alley. So same thing. He's all about the whole film noir type thing. And so we were doing some stuff like this. Same thing, processed, printed, RC paper, just very basic stuff. But once again, when I shot this, I wanted to play this with much mood and shadow as possible. So once again, you'll see these patterns throughout. This is another scene from his film. I think it was he retitled it called The Hot Rain. That was the new title. The other title was pretty lengthy. And I just said, just call it something else. But once again, these were used throughout his little short film. So that's him and another young lady. Her name was Jen. And we went down by the lagoon, the pond. That was shot in 1988. We shot 16mm black and white as well as 35mm stills. And this was from a test shoot from a friend of mine who's a singer. We were working on some artwork sleeves for her CD. And she had a thing for her leather boots. And so she said, hey, can you photograph my boots? I say, well, let's do something different once again. So this method of photography is a lot of what I do with lighting and composition is very cinematic. And so I had a couple of slide projectors and film strip projectors. This was our key light source. And I would just reflect them off of mirrors, and I would just bend the mirrors, and I would just play with these little hard hot spots and key light, and a lot of hard shadow fall off, something unique and different. And we're going to talk about the influences in a minute, but this is all stemmed from things that I've seen growing up, along with reading up on other photographers that I've always liked. But once again, I wanted something kind of edgy and crazy. So not just a generic shot of a girl in boots. It had to be something a little bit more alluring. Okay, let's go into the 1990s briefly. This is going to be a quick one because the majority of the 90s, I focused strictly on filmmaking. I really was, I was more than motivated to get started. So I made several short films. This is one of the few slides I actually had of actual strips of film. This is from a short that I did about the Malcolm X merchandising in the early 90s due to Spike Lee, as you can see him right there. And it was a combination of cutouts, painting and drawing on film, optical compositing, and cell animation. Once again, all analog, and it was called X the Baby Cinema. And this was the sort of I guess you could say kind of a breakthrough film, because this film is played all over the world, has won like tons of awards, and it's in the permanent collection of the Yale University Film Archive. And I just had to throw this in here somewhere because once again, even though it's a film, I incorporated a lot of photographic elements in terms of collage and whatnot. So there are images that I photographed, and I manipulated, collaged it, and I painted on it, and I optically animated it with my 16mm Bolex. And that's a shot of me in the 90s. And that camera there is my one of my prized possessions. It's a 16mm Eclair. I bought it from Tri-C Metro campus. They had it in their storage room for like 30 years, taking dust, and they sold it at an auction. And that was one of my go-to cameras because it's such a sexy camera. And this camera was a key element of the French New Wave, which was a big inspiration to me amongst other American independent filmmakers and documentary filmmakers in the 60s and 70s. So it was a blessing to own one of these. And there was an article about me written back in Cleveland Magazine, and this was the picture they used. And that was my little makeshift editing bench. I've come a long way since then, but there was basically a hot splicer, 2 rewinds, and a sync block, which sadly I no longer have because I loaned it out and never got it back. That sync block was amazing. And up there are the strands of film for the second short that I did called My First Drug, The Idiot Box. That film in particular was unique because I shot actual slides, 35mm slides, and I used my SLR as a stop motion camera. So I was doing stop motion animation with the 35mm still camera. Then I went back and I animated each slide with the Bolex. So basically, you're going to see, once again, a lot of compositing, scratching on film, optical manipulation, along with stop motion of the actual actors through slides. And that's what that was. So had to throw that in there somewhere. But now let's jump into the 2000s and get to the real stuff here. So when the 2000s rolled around, several things happened. One, I was growing out of my mom's attic, which is where I had a small little studio. And that attic, I shot some amazing stuff in there, like tons of photos, tons of films. And it just got to the point where I was getting more equipment, but the attic was getting too small. And it was kind of weird having people come to my neighborhood, especially these young women, going up into my mom's attic with all this weird setup and doing these crazy images. So I decided I needed a space to work out of. So I worked out of a few friends' studio space, and finally the Tar Press allowed us to do the lease there. And so that's when I started doing, I basically expanded, and I moved in there June of 2003, moved in there. And within a week of moving in, photo shoots were being scheduled. And all the gear that I had in my house moved over there, and we were doing some of the craziest stuff. So this was a photo that was part of Cleveland Fashion Week. They had me do these weird photo montages for the runway models. And so once again, they wanted me to get crazy, weird, wild. So crazy stuff like that. This was shot in 2004. They were doing construction outside the building. And the same thing, this is probably one of the last photos that I actually had processed by hand and was printed because my allergies got worse. But I did a series of photos with several models. They were, a lot of these girls wanted portfolios to be updated, or they wanted something a little bit more edgier to their books or their comp cards, whatever. So I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Because there's a lot of photographers happening at this time, but this is before the whole digital boom kicked in. So there were only but so many photographers that knew how to shoot film, but they were also creative. So this is another one of those examples of me being very cinematic in terms of composition and storytelling. There's a narrative in a lot of what I do. I mean, you know, this is a good friend of mine, Daryl McCullough. He's a writer and a director, and he's based out of Michigan, Detroit. And he had a book published, and he wanted me to do the portrait on the back of the book, and he wanted like an old school type, vintage style, you know, insert. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. And the camera I used with this was an old Kowa Japanese medium format camera. It was like a Hasselblad knockoff. And the camera was in my buddy's garage for a while, and it belonged to his dad. His dad let it sit in the garage. It was all rusty. He said, "Here, you want this?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I thought the camera was basically going to be junk, but no. And I shot some really good stuff with it. This is one of them. And this is one of the first photos I had used that was actually in a book cover. I did many after this, but this was one of the first. Theme and concept. Now we're getting more into that because I really want to get more into telling a story or expressing an idea in a narrative, but really be strategic in the composition and whatnot. This was a series I did. These two young ladies here, actually their mother and daughter, it was part of a series that I did that was exhibited at the Gene Brandt Gallery up here in Cleveland, and it was in a few other galleries. It was one of the first big one-man shows I did in terms of photography, and it was called Nature of the Beast. And this was the actual postcard from that. The prints are still in the basement of another gallery, but I still have the negatives and everything. But this show was really an eye catcher because I wanted to really explore the things about domestication. And a lot of this you're going to hear about in a lot of what I do, but talk about the household, the different types of family values, the relationship between husband and wife, or mother and daughter, or children, or parents. So you're going to see a lot of that. That's a key element in a lot of what I do. I'm really big on family values, but on the upswing, how things can be sort of turned upside down because of all these questions of relationships and morals and standards within the family, especially within the Black community and whatnot. This is another way. Now, a lot of people that know me for doing stuff like this. And this is another one of those domesticated films. This is actually from a film that I'm working on that I finished and I'm going to hopefully have ready soon, but it's once again involving domestication. And I like making a mess on a lot of my stuff, and you're going to see a lot of women wearing heels, squashing stuff, and people get some kicks out of that, I guess. But this picture went a long ways. This girl, she was a yoga teacher, and she's based in LA now, and she had some strong legs. And so, but we did a lot of us. I had her actually making the pancakes and then splattering butter and all this crap. But this picture really sticks out because once again, I was playing with a lot of fisheye optics and everything, just before it became really trendy, and then it became kind of a cliche. So I sort of leaned away from that. But once again, this was, I believe, that was 2004, I think that was. Portrait simplicity with analog. A lot of what you're seeing, all these images are pretty much, the lighting is very simplistic, even though it comes off being very dramatic. This is a friend of mine, her and her mom both modeled for me. This was also for Cleveland Fashion Week too. And I wanted to do something that was in the vein of Irving Penn, Helmut Newton, Richard Avedon. These are some of my big influences as terms of photographers go. And all natural light. I think I had maybe one bounce card and that was it, but that's all natural available light. And this was shot with my Hasselblad that I had. I finally graduated to having a Hasselblad, and I love that camera so much. And once again, natural light, nice rich shadows, just, but that sense of, she's in charge. She's in charge of this. And you got the little reflection right there in the doorway. But I love stuff like this. It's kind of unusual because it wasn't considered normal for a fashion type thing. But once again, I'm thinking, well, why limit yourself? So, so you're going to see, if you look at my work, you're going to see a lot of stuff like this outgoing. This was me doing something really unique, because this was one of the first shoots I did in my studio, where actually the 2 days before the shoot, I sat down with a floor plan and I illustrated out a floor plan for light. This was a big lighting exercise because I wanted to pretend like I was doing a painting in the vein of John Singer Sargent, who I love his work. Let me know if I'm going too fast. But I love John Singer Sargent. And I wanted to try and capture those nuances. So once again, a lot of people really ignore the aspect of lighting, not so much studio lights, but any kind of light. This picture was used with, I think, 3-point lighting. I had a 8K softbox, which was all halogen tungsten. I had a fluorescent fixture rigged up on a C-stand, and I had a bounce card at the bottom, and I had a small Fresnel with the correct the blue filter with the I believe it was an opal diffusion. Literally, that's what I got. And it took me a while to do the sort of the floor plan. And I positioned her in the floor. So anyway, basically, once I had her positioned, she was a model for Fashion Week also. And this is one of my favorite pictures. I love this photo so much. And it's just a good example of what you can do with the various elements of lighting and color temperature, but manipulating the color temperature. And I need to say something too, because I think I forgot mentioning it. No Photoshop. None of these pictures are Photoshop. They're all the actual scans from the actual negative or slide. So everything you're seeing is here. The only Photoshop is the formatting to put it into the PowerPoint. So none of this is Photoshop. This is all analog photography, strictly about the lighting, strictly about the film, filtration, optics, nothing else. This was another goofy, weird, crazy analog type thing. And this was inspired by Guy Bardin, the French photographer. I love his stuff too, especially his use of color and everything. Same thing. This is Alicia. I had her put on a couple layers of makeup and we did some really crazy stuff. So this is like a mock photo advertisement. I did a lot of those and I love that stuff. This is a friend of mine. She's an actress out in LA right now. We went on location. Once again, she wanted some newer headshots, but I said, well, let's do something dramatic instead of the standard cute, cheesy, So once again, I'm all about doing commercial quality work, but why not add a little bit of cinematic value to that and everything? So this was shot with a Hasselblad, and it's a little bit on the grainy side because that's how I rated it. But I just love that level of texture and everything. And, once again, natural light, the whole 9 yards. And there's some of these weird behind the scene moments. This is one of my favorite models. Her name is Jade. Love her to death. She's amazing. And in between setups for our shoot, she was in the bathroom listening to her music, and I just grabbed my camera, whipped out a few shots. A lot of people love this photo, but this was shot with my Nikon. And once again, very raw in the moment. And it's just sometimes, because I don't really consider myself one of those kind of shooters, but every so often, but we're used to doing this with our phones now. But back then, yeah, I had at any given moment, preset your focus, preset your exposure. This is one of my favorite photos also. Similar to the picture with the other young lady, Katrina, the girl with the color picture, similar method here. But this was when I was exploring with the whole concept how light actually moves. A lot of us don't realize it, but if you look at a light fixture, or whether it's the sun or any fluorescent, if you know lighting, you know that the light is moving, thing that is flickering, the filament is going. And every so often you can manipulate that when you capture it, and it's going to basically just sort of glaze over the subject, so to speak, and the exposure varies. When I shoot, I do use a light meter, and I'll check the space in terms for an incidental reading in terms of the foreground, midground, background. But if there's something that could really crush in terms of the contrast and everything, I'll do that in the lighting. I try to do as much of this when I'm shooting, not so much in the post. When I do any grading in the post, which is, it's like what you would be in a dark room, use a filter, or you would, do the burning and the dodging and all that. I try to do that when I shoot. Once again, a lot of this is because I want to incorporate this method of lighting into the films that I make. And I actually wind up doing that later, but I love this photo. And then we get into some of the weird, crazy stuff. Not that anything else isn't weird and crazy that you guys have seen. So people are wondering, this guy is really out there. A friend of mine had a bunch of old vintage dolls that were cracked and broken, and they looked really freaky. Some of them, I guess, like this one here, the eyes rolled up in the head. So my friend, who's a photographer, Teresa, who's a great model and a good photographer. She's actually modeled for her a few times. She came down and we did something really crazy. Now, if you look at the picture closely, you may not be able to tell, but it looks like there's two women there, and it actually is, but it's actually her twice. That was all done in camera. That's an old school in camera double exposure process. But it just looks so weird because it's like she's literally morphing out of herself. And then you got the baby here having this little weird seizure. Really creepy, I know, but toys, especially odd toys like this, they're seen as cliche in a lot of concepts, but I like the idea of just putting them and making them even more contorted and dramatic. So once again, this is me screwing around having fun, but I'm trying to find those little elements of nuance within a narrative, within the shot, within the frame, within the space, because once again, it's a photo, but everything moves. The shapes move, the direction of the eye line moves. So all this goes on in my head when I'm setting this stuff up, trying to explain to the model without them being freaked out. That's hard, but and that woman right there, that's actually the mother to the other girl you saw sitting outside. Her name is Sandra. So let's talk portraits now. Grabbed a few portraits that I love, along with the other one you just saw. Same method, in studio, basic lighting. This is my friend Rachel. Great model. She has a very unusual look about her. And same thing, 35 millimeter. I think this was with one light and one bounce card. And I just, literally those little nuances, those eyes, the hair, very basic, very simple, but also just alluring. A lot of people don't like this photo, but I like this picture. It's very unusual. She's not hurt, not like that. I just put the band-aids on. But I wanted to do something that was in the vein of what Helmut Newton would do on a big scale, but on a very minimalist scale. And also you can say Diane Arbus, something like that, Cindy Sherman. But no, I had this thing about band-aids, or like any type of healing type method. I was originally going to use methylate or something, but I think that might be a little too much. So I just used band-aids because this is my friend Olga. She was a model I worked with a lot back then, and she was all about the unusual. But once again, same thing: 1-point lighting, one bounce card, 35 millimeter, simplistic, basic, beautiful shot. Here's Rachel again. A lot of people say that has that Vermeer quality to it, and I like Vermeer stuff too. This was with one light. It was an 8K softbox, and I think a bounce, and that was it. This was shot on medium speed, color negative. Same thing, 35 millimeter. I'm gonna say it again: no Photoshop, basic, simple. Most of these ideas I sit down, I sketch out. I have like a ton of sketchbooks or any piece of paper and pencil I can find. I'll just, in any given moment, whether I'm in bed or I'm in the bathroom or in the car waiting, I'll just start sketching ideas out. It's second nature to me. This is a good example of a light leak. This was, I believe, I believe it was the Hasselblad, and the what do you call it? The back, the cartridge back, I think wasn't all the way in, and it caused a small light leak, and some of the images got fogged. But this one actually I thought was pretty cool. This young lady, her name's Kayla. She was in LA, a model in LA. Now she's in New York now working, and I was one of the first guys to shoot her. But once again, love this picture. Some of those imperfections, those happy accidents. There's no shame in that. At the same time, be aware of what you got and how you got it. You might want to try it again someday. And I've actually done that many times. And this is, I forgot her, Angela Richards, I believe. And this was when she just graduated high school. And I wound up photographing her wedding. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not her wedding, her baby shower, because now she's a mom with 2 kids now. But she was an inspiring model back then. Not sure if she's modeling now, but this was kind of a unique thing. This was also for Fashion Week Cleveland, and that's how I met her. Same thing, very basic, playing with the symmetrics and everything. I guess I should point something out too. A lot of the poses you're seeing with the models, I actually put them in those poses. I'll actually do the pose with them. I'll sort of pseudo choreograph it, or I'll just, construct it, whatever. But yeah, 90% of what you're seeing me. And I didn't mention this before. That's the one thing I sort of left out of the whole presentation. I've been a life drawing model for like a good 25, 30 years almost. I did it back since 92, and I sort of stopped doing it after the pandemic wrapped up because I still do it part-time for portraits, but I don't get naked anymore. But a lot of the poses, and this was partially inspired by reading those comic books, were almost like superhero poses, but I would never have the model do anything that I wouldn't do. So literally every other pose you're seeing, that's 100% me. And the models are like, oh, that's cool. And of course, we know who this is. This is Josie. This is probably the third session we ever did. Josie is another model. She does a lot of modeling. She's actually a nurse in real life, but she's Nigerian, but she has a phenomenal look. And once again, this is just standard old school basic studio lighting. This may have been used with actual strobes, I believe. I'm not sure, but 35 millimeter. And I believe this was Ilford film, either Ilford or Fuji. I use a lot of that for black and white. This was a series that I did that I really love. I used the Hasselblad, and it was once again involving domestication. My friend Jen here, she's a hairstylist. Oh, go back. And I shot a series of shots in her house working, and I had her wear the white t-shirt and everything, and all black and white, medium format. Some really great stuff there. This is Amanda King, who's a photographer, and she used to run Shooting Without Bullets, and now she's currently in the exhibition at the Reserve Historical Society here in Cleveland for Black photographers. But I modeled for her a few times, and she would model for me, and she considers me one of her biggest inspirations because she knows a lot of photographers, but none of them work the way I work, and she keeps insisting how I'm like, I should be more famous. I'm like, well, it ain't about being famous. I don't know anybody. So, but I love this picture of her. Another one of my favorites. This was a portrait we shot at the Reserve at the Lakefront Nature Reserve over there overlooking the lake. This is Jessica Hertzfeld. Same thing. There's only aside from the sun, there's a big bounce car underneath. And this was shot with my Hasselblad. This was shot with the Fuji Acros 100 speed film. Once again, the hair, the texture, the stuff with the trees in the background. This is one of I love this picture so much. I've known her since she was in high school, and I have photos of her back then too, her and her brother. And her brother is actually working on a screenplay because he's a playwright in New York now, and he wants to write a screenplay with me about me, believe it or not. You'll be hearing about that later. But yeah, I know the whole family very well, but I love this photo of her. And once again, this is almost like can't think of the painter, but when I see this, I think of the song by Debussy, "Girl with the Flaxen Hair." Okay. Okay, quick breakaway from photos. This was the film that I did, and I don't know if anybody can see that because we're blocking it. Can they see that? I don't know. That photo there that's the photo promoting my film Paper Shadows, my feature film. And when I did that picture, because that was actually in the movie, but in between takes, I had the actors hold that position. I pulled my camera out and I shot photos. That picture was influenced by Irving Penn's portrait of Miles Davis for his Tutu album cover. There's a picture of Miles Davis doing this. And I love that photo. And this was sort of my little, because I love that picture. And this wasn't mimicking it. It was basically just inspired by, but I love that picture. Youth portraits. I did a lot of teaching for a while. I know I didn't want to get too much into the teaching aspect, but I worked with many kids, middle school kids, high school kids. And this was pretty much near the end of that. I did a workshop at Wood Hill Community Center. And these are some of the kids that I photographed. We were teaching them photography and they were shooting, but I brought my Hasselblad and they wanted to see how I shot. And they were like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Well, this is a medium format camera." They're like, "Well, how come it's all old?" Because film cameras look old. But I said, "Here, I'm going to take you guys this picture." And of course, they wanted to see the picture after I shot it. So now I have to get the film process. So anyway, but these are some of those pictures. And these are really good kids. Some of their work was really nice, but they were just intrigued the fact that old cameras can still do stuff like this, which, So yeah, this girl, her name is Amber Abagati, another one of my favorite models. She's in New York now, and she was also a CIA student, and she was a graphic design major, but she loved the way I worked. And she was, once again, she was inspired by how I like to manipulate images. And I see a picture of, I don't know why that's in there. I see a picture of Josie in there. That's a glitch. Okay, don't worry about that. But anyway, Amber was really cool, and she just loved the idea of me manipulating light, especially for black and white. And of course, this is one of our favorite photos. This is Amber. I'm sorry, not Amber. This is Josie. Now, let me explain what this was about. That bridge is the overpass on the Shoreway off of the Marginal on 90. And I've driven past that bridge a million times, and I always was curious what it was like going up there. When I was a kid, my neighbors took me up there once, and I always wanted to go back there. And so I decided that year I was going to do a bunch series of photos up there. So along with Josie and 6 other models, I went up there to shoot. Mainly, I wanted to see what the light was going to do because I'm thinking, wow, if we shoot this in black and white, think of those shadows from the grid up above. And so I had her wear that outfit with the patterns, and we went down there. I want to say just like around between 1:30, 2 o'clock, something like that, where the sun was right above, and we were getting these strong shadows. And I love these pictures. And these are the few I let her strike the poses. She struck the poses because I was like at a distance. I think I had a my telephoto lens, so I was like at a distance because I wanted to get as much manipulation of the shadows, but really contrasty. This was shot with I believe the Fuji 100 Acros 2 film. This picture here, Josie again, flip side, which is part of the On the Grid show. Uh, this picture, ironically, was inspired by an album cover by the band Spyro Gyra. If you know them, they were like a smooth jazz type band. And they had an album called Incognito that I bought back in the 80s when I was in the Air Force. And I love the album cover to that. And it was a guy walking with his head slouched down like that, but he was like a ghost. And there was a woman with her dog in the background looking at him. And the colors in that picture were so cool. It was an illustration, like a painting illustration. And I was thinking I would love to do something like that. And so there's a building in my neighborhood I think it's a design. I'm not sure if it's a graphics place. I know they do some type of graphics work, I believe, but the building outside has all these rainbow colors spilling down the wall. And so we were on location shooting, and I said, hey, before we leave, I want to shoot over here. And I had her throw on that outfit. And those are actually my clothes. A lot of the models you're seeing what they're wearing, those are my clothes. I have a wide variety of vintage clothes in my collection. So that top, that skirt, those shoes, that's all mine. And she started walking, and she literally fell into that pose. I was like, that's the shot. That's the shot. I said, so, and she held it, and I grabbed a few shots of that. And so this is barely scratching the surface of what I do and how I do it and why I do things. So on that happy note, let's do an analog cheers. I didn't shoot this picture, by the way. My friend Alex shot this of me. um, but yeah, I'm all about basically the bare essentials of making things, being visually literate, but at the same time exploring, and trying to find ways of making things say something without trying to be heavy-handed, even though I think that goes with any artist. Everybody has their own way of projecting, communicating, expressing, and I just do it this way. But it works both ways, because considering I've been doing this photography since 1981, and been working professionally since like 1989, 90. I'm still growing. I still feel there's a lot more there, but at the same time, spilling over into the making of the cinema, the filmmaking, and vice versa, that makes it all the more awkward and challenging. At the same time, makes it fun, and it's also unpredictable too. So, on that happy note, okay, let's bring on the questions.
Yeah, folks, if you have any questions, please pop them into the comments and I'll read them out for Robert. Robert, you emphasized quite a few times the importance of you doing in-camera work, not doing what folks might imagine would be in post-production. Can you talk a little bit about why that is so important to you? Or is it that it's important to not manipulate outside of reality? Like, yeah, take us through why you've emphasized that and keep that as such a high priority for yourself and your work?
That's a very good question. I'm going to see if I can answer that without sounding too pretentious. A lot of this has to do with the cycles of life. Every so often we think about, oh man, what if I could have went back and did this? Oh, what if I could have, if only would have been this. And it's like, well, there are things in our existence that don't allow that. And one of the reasons why I'm so big into analog visual arts in particular, everything is finite. In the digital world, everything is infinite because you can always go back and do things to it and everything. And for people like me with ADHD, sometimes it's like, okay, that may not be the best thing because you're going to keep screwing with it forever. My thing has always been, we are analog beings. We're going to always be analog beings. Nothing's going to change that. I don't care how many phones or tablets or whatever you got or any VR stuff, anything, nothing's going to change. We're always going to be analog. And I'm all about the technology. I'm all about digital. I mean, I learned a lot by doing this. This was like a pain for me, but I learned it. And now I have something under my belt. I'm all about exploring new horizons and everything. I just think it's unfortunate that so many people are losing a grip about how things, when something is made, it's there. Don't mess with it. When I'm capturing something, not the whole idea is, we have a saying in filmmaking, and it's with any time of production, you fix it in pre-production, don't fix it in post. You know how they say, oh, we'll fix that in post. No, you fix it in pre. You sit down, you have your idea, you sketch it out, you think it through, and you have your contingencies lined up. That's how I work. When I do a shoot for a certain idea, and all these shoots were examples of that, I know the camera I'm going to use. I know exactly the lenses I'm going to use. I know the settings of the lenses I have all these little equations about what kind of settings I want. I understand about the filters. The lights, more than anything, I'm all about the lighting. And I'll have my light meter with me a day before the shoot, and I'll just do pre-lighting type things. And I'll think about, okay, if she wears this with this fabric and it reflect from this wall here or off of this floor, all these things make a difference. I would much rather have as much control over that as possible instead of, okay, it's done. Now let me go into the computer and go into Photoshop and Lightroom and do this. Oh, look when I do this. Look when I do that. And that's what if you're doing commercial work, that's one thing. But if you're just trying to be a legitimate photographer, professional, whatever, well, maybe you should try to reevaluate your ideology of how you are with your tools, because people nowadays are too much into their tools. And I was never about that, because the problem with me was growing up, I didn't have these luxuries. I had everything I use, even up until now, is for second-rate stuff or third-rate stuff. The lenses I use, some of these lenses are like 50 years old. Some of them are even from the late 60s, but they're still good glass. Every lens from every decade has a look to it. And so I have this, if you come to my studio, you're going to see a million lenses. I have like thousands of lenses in my studio. And there's different lenses for different, each element gives a certain look. That whatever was used to make that element, whatever sand, whatever in that glass cutting gives that look. And I just feel that, it's a plus and a bonus to really challenge yourself as well as exercise your senses into making what you want the way you want it and having unlimited control on that. That's what an artist does. When a painter paints, he mixes his mediums, if someone is going to do enameling, or if they're going to do some type of sculptural three-dimensional, they're in control of that medium. Emily said that about her work. Every other artist I know to this day that has a signature, they have unlimited control of what their medium is and how it's presented. And I just think it sucks nowadays that there's all these photographers now that just think, oh, it's all about the camera. It's about the camera. No, it's not about the camera. The camera's in here, and these are your lenses. And once again, your settings are in here, and in your heart. That's what visual artists, that's what being an artist is all about. Whether it's a visual artist or a musician, anything, a dancer, choreographer, that's how it should be. But nowadays, it's just so easy to take a picture and throwing into the computer and just type a bunch of stuff and just program a bunch of stuff, export it out. Oh yeah, look at this. So that's not me. That's not how I work. One more thing I want to add to that. There's a lot of professional photographers that shoot auto. And I think that's great. When I shoot, it's so tempting to go to auto when I do my digital shoots. But even then, I still shoot manual. I use my manual lenses, and it's a discipline. It's all disciplinary. It's all physical and mental exercise for me, so yeah, hope that answers that.
Well, to tack onto that now, I mean, you do have some post production things that you've done, and MJ has asked specifically, can you talk a little bit about your work with alternative processes like painting and manipulating film images by hand?
Yes. What happened was this happened in 1979. There was the Cleveland teacher strike happened. And so all of us kids were stuck at home. There was no school. And I had a bunch of books on filmmaking. And one of the books talked about alternatives of animation and film manipulation. And they were saying, hey, did you know you can take a dry pen or a needle and you can scratch on film and make art? I was like, really? And I was like, wow, okay. I was like only 13 years old. And so we had a few rolls of a film that came out unexposed. It was blank. I don't know how it happened, but it was all black, basically black leader. And so one day I took a pen and I pulled the film out and I just started scratching on it. And I was thinking, wow. And I just kept doing it, doing it. And next thing you know, I was so hooked into that. And I was thinking, wow, you can do a lot of stuff with this. Then I would project it. And from that point on, it was like, wow, it's like, okay, I never considered that. Then I was turned on to Norman McLaren, who was one of my big influences. Not so much that he did the scratching on a film, but he had a lot to say with social commentary and political commentary. He was really a radical dude. A lot of people want to see the scratch on films. They immediately say, oh, you're into Stan Brakhage. It's like, well, I like Brakhage, but McLaren was my guy. Brakhage, that's a whole other thing, but I was more into that. I like the idea of taking methods like that or techniques, but making it say something instead of being cerebral in terms of all the psychosis stuff, which what Brakhage did, which is cool. But no, that's something that I've always done, and I still do that. There's several films I'm working on right now. We're doing that. In fact, if you're interested, I've done the scratch on film process on 8mm, 16, and 35. But in the near future, I'll be doing it with large format 65mm. And I've been stocking up on all this 65mm stock for the last 25 years. No, 27 years. Yeah. We're finally going to use it. And basically, we're going to take the film. It's all raw negative, but it's 65mm. I wish I had it here to show you. And we're going to actually process it. It'll be black, and then we're going to etch into that. So it's a process in itself. The problem is it's time consuming. When I made X the Baby Cinema, the Malcolm X film, we did that technique, and that film took me 8.5 months to make. And the first 35mm film I made, Motion Picture Genocide, took me a year to make. And that was my first 35 painting and drawing on film type film. But it's a disciplinary thing. It's good therapy, but it's also like doing paintings, many little paintings. And once again, you're still looking for that composition. You're still looking for that transition. You're still looking for the guidance to the audience. You're trying to lure people in and take them here and still throw things at them, but still compress their subconscious with all these colors. Then you have the text and words that go in within that. So I like that kind of stuff. And along with that, the sound component is important with that too. So the series of shorts I did on Dexter Davis, I made a couple of films on him, his documentary shorts. We use the same techniques for that. So it's just, once again, there's a method to the madness, but a lot of it is, once again, believe it or not, I do sit down and I script out these shots. There's like a timeline. There's like basically a treatment, and I'll have like a little breakdown of what each shot's going to be, how long it's going to be. So it's, in many ways, it's making a movie in a traditional sense, but you're sort of doing things off kilter because you have control, but you don't have control. But a lot of it is how much patience you have. It's all about the patience factor with that. So yeah, we could do a whole thing about that by itself.
That's great. So we have a question from Kelly. Kelly is interested in hearing your thoughts on noticing in a moment when something happens sort of serendipitously rather than as a result of your immense planning, decision, direction behind the camera. So can you talk about that a bit?
That's a good question too. Okay. When I set up a scenario or any type of environment that we're going to capture, once again, it's all plotted out in the best way possible. I always try to allow for contingencies. So when things like that do happen at any given moment, I'll say, hold that right there. In fact, my students always made fun of me for doing that because I would do these demonstrations when I teach photography at Newbridge, Cleveland. I was teaching there for a while, and my students would be watching me do a demo with the model. And the model would be just waiting for something while I'm talking to the students, and I'll look out the corner of my eye like, hold that right there, like that. And then I'll say, everybody look at that. And I'll say, okay, walk over here. And I'll look at it from this angle. Now let's look at it from that angle. Now look what that light's doing. And I would say, you see that? Those things happen out of the blue, and either you're ready or you're not ready. So every so often I'll have I'll have one or two cameras set aside. I may have my main camera on the tripod on the sticks, because I use that. But every so often, if I see something for a hot second, I'll be like, don't move. And then I'll just immediately try to capture it. Half the time it works. Half the time it's like, you moved. It's not there anymore, because those little nuances make a big difference. So it's one of those things you just got to plan for, because I see things, we all see things every day. the crazy artists that are out here, we see things as like, oh, I love how that relates to that and how that translates to that and da 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 da. So it's a matter of you being able to capture it. Either you're ready or you're not ready. So whenever I'm setting up for something, in fact, you know what I do? It's really crazy. I'll set up a scene and I'll light it, whether it's a film or it's for a photo, portrait, whatever. And I'll light the subject. And then I'll go behind the subject and I'll look at what's beyond the camera. And you'll be surprised some of the nice lighting you're going to see out there. I mean, you'll see a nice palette of shadows here and some highlights reflecting off of this here and something in the foreground. You're going to see things. So every so often, I will try to explain this when I'm working with a crew about, we're going to light this subject here, but when we're done, let's all go behind and see what it looks like out there. And let's go on the flip side of that. And every so often, I'll be like, hey, you know what? That's our light. Let's replicate that and let's just reinforce that. And they're going to be like, but why? So no, things like that, you should always be, well, at least if you want to go above and beyond, there should be no shame in exploring that. I mean, at any given moment, you're going to see something or feel something, and it's going to be just out of the corner of your eye. Or maybe even, you might be setting something up down here that you weren't considering because the shot's over there. And from there, you're going to see this composition that's going to be like, oh, wow. So like I said, those shots of her on the bridge, for example, I mean, that would not have happened had I not been there on a shoot beforehand, because I was on the other side of the bridge shooting something else. And the light was very similar, but it wasn't as strong. I was thinking, I wonder what would happen if I did this during late afternoon, late meridian. What would it be like? And sure enough, it was perfect. I was like, yep, that's what it was. So I may be focusing on the moment right there and then, but at the same time, I'm always calculating, what would happen if we do this? We'll do that. So some of the models didn't like that because that was just too spontaneous. And some of them are like, hell yeah, let's do that. And, or I'm working with actors or whatnot. So this translates in my filmmaking as well as the photography too. So, but once again, as long as you have awareness to that and you have those sort of backup contingencies to capture it, that's all that matters. But just be prepared. But happy accidents come and go. But as long as you have the resource to sort of be in control of what you're getting, it may not be an accident. So.
Perfect. So Robert, we're going to wrap up here in just a second, but can you share with folks if they want to see your work or see what you're up to next? Maybe do you have a next thing that folks should look out for, or a website that folks should go and have a look at?
Oh, wow. Okay. I'll try to make this quick. Okay. There's an exhibition at the Reserve Historical Society. It's called History in Their Hands. I'm not one of the featured photographers. However, I have the portraits of the photographers in the show. I shot those portraits. So they're in the show. And there's a video documentary that I made interviewing the photographers. That's in the show too. And there's a self-portrait of me in there also. But technically I'm not in the show, but I guess I am in the show. So there's that. That's going to be up until September of next year. So that'll be up for a while. That's up here in Cleveland. There's another exhibition for the mayors of Northeast Ohio. And I was one of the many photographers in Cleveland. We photographed different mayors of different counties. And I photographed the mayor of Woodmere, and the mayor of Bedford, Mayor Stevens and Mayor Hobart. Those are portraits. Those were digital. Okay. And we have an exhibition here at the Tara Press Building. We have our annual artist exhibition. That opens actually this coming Thursday, and that'll be up until the end of October. And I'll have some films playing on 2 monitors on film loops if you want to check those out. And if you want to see more of my work in terms of photos, you can go to my Flickr page. If you go to flickr.com, if you punch up Neo Hypo Films, you'll see some of these images in there. There's like over almost 3,000 photos in there. And even then, that's not even scratching the surface. But that's a good way of seeing what I do. A little bit of creative stuff, abstract stuff, commercial stuff, a little bit of everything. Or if you go onto my Instagram, you can get on that link through there, or that's Cine Hypo Films on Instagram. And yeah. Or if you just Google my name, if you Google Robert Banks filmmaker, a lot of things are going to pop up. The thing I'm working on right now is, believe it or not, I'm trying to get a commercial film under my belt. I have my feature film Paper Shadows, which hopefully will be screening this time next year, because we finished that as a digital film. We shot it on 35mm film, but we finished it digitally, which I didn't want to do that, but it was a time issue. But we're actually going back to cut the actual film negative to finish it on actual 35mm celluloid. So we'll have that hopefully ready for next year to be screened on 35mm. That was shot on 35mm black and white in CinemaScope. And it's an art film. There's no plot. It's more of a concept film. But if you like these images, you'll like that film, because the few people that have seen it loved it. And it won an Audience Choice Award at the Chicago Underground Film Festival. And there's that. And hopefully maybe, oh, there's my timer, okay. Um, there's gonna be several new shorts finishing that'll be out by next year as well too, and a 30th anniversary of a documentary that I did back in 1995 that'll be playing next year too. So there's a lot of stuff coming up. The feature length narrative, if it happens, that will be next summer, but you'll be hearing about that. It's more commercial, but the producers wanted me to, once again, everybody wants me to be the artsy weird guy. I'm like, okay, well, that's all subjective, but they want something that was out of the norm. The trick is if they'll let me shoot it on film. That's the trick. So in case you guys didn't notice, yeah, I am a celluloid analog fanatic, and everything in terms of that I do strictly myself is strictly film. If it's a job for a client or if it's something more formal, if they insist on digital, I have no problem doing digital. So
Perfect.
yeah,
All
there's
right.
many.
So Robert, you have a variety of ways that folks can continue to engage in your work. So thank you again for the generosity of your time and talent, Robert. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Robert C. Banks Jr. as a part of our programming for On the Grid. A special thank you to the curator, Kelly Dietrich. A big thank you to all the participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks and have a great day.